Bingo.
All right. Page 29 in your study guide. Look at question number 1 at the bottom of the page. What are your most valuable possessions? Your children. Your children are your possession? Your most valuable possessions.
They're our responsibility. When they're little.
A new car.
Your new car? Home. Home.
Let me tell you about my puppies.
Are they possessions?
All right.
Property, according to the judges, that's property. So
Yeah.
All right. Before we start today's introduction to our lesson that our author provided us, we need to make sure we understand the title of today's study. What are my possessions? When we think about possessions, what kind of things fall in that category of possessions? Home,
Car.
cars,
Things we value,
pardon, anything of value.
anything that we value.
Anything we value, let's even better, I didn't say it that way. Okay, anything we value. What else? Anything else fall in that category of possessions?
Bible,
Bible. Okay. Anything else? What do you possess?
Clothing.
Clothing?
Jewelry.
Jewelry? Pardon?
Too much.
Too much stuff.
I've got some possessed relatives.
Possessed relatives.
Oh, that's
What I'm trying to do is to get you to expand on the topic of possessions. That's our whole transformed by my possessions.
We're trying to make it hard for you.
belief
Think
in God.
outside the
Belief in
box.
God, that's one of them, that's true.
You want us to think outside the box.
I do.
That's what he's doing.
Normally we think of possessions like money or things, objects. And as they said, things we value. But what about our time?
Ooh, I know that.
What about your abilities and gifts?
Your character.
You possess those abilities and gifts, whether you think about it as being something you possess or not. But you possess that. Because everything we have, all of our possessions, are ours from God. God has provided all that we have.
Yeah.
So don't limit our thoughts just to those things you can pick up and put in your pocket or drive down the road or live in. Those are certainly possessions, but God has provided us with all kinds of abilities, all kinds of opportunities, and the time and the abilities to carry those out. Those are our possessions too. They're granted to us by God, and it's how we use all of those possessions that matter. So let's today look at our introduction on page 30. Look at the point at the top of the page. Possessions don't last. Your relationship with God does. Now let's clarify. Possessions don't last. Your abilities and your time here on earth don't last either. There's going to be an end to that. There's going to be a time where those things will go away just like the rest of everything else will go away. But today we're going to focus primarily on material possessions, although I don't want you to lose sight of the fact of the other things God gives us in terms of our abilities and time and opportunities. Our author says, you can't take it with you, but some people certainly have tried. Take Billy Stanley. When he died at age 82, he was buried on his 1967 Harley Davidson Electric Glide Cruiser.
What?
He worked for years fabricating a massive casket of cement, wood, and plexiglass. Plexiglass is important. So everyone could witness his last ride. As the funeral proceeded to the cemetery, onlookers all saw Billy Stanley on his bike, surrounded by his trophies. He was determined to try and take it all with him.
Years ago, before him, there was a guy that got buried in his Edsel.
His
Edsel
Edsel.
car, yeah, they had his whole car buried. That's
Really?
where he could, in his Edsel. So, I mean, there's characters have done things like that, yeah.
This specialized casket that he fabricated had plexiglass panels in it, obviously, so people could look in and see him on his motorcycle.
Who would want to see?
Boy,
Yeah.
he wanted everybody
It
to
would
see
have
him.
been a
He was
spectacle.
He was obviously proud of him and his motorcycle and his trophies. He must have won trophies with his motorcycle, I suppose. Anyway, that may sound excessive, but we all can get carried away with our possessions. Perhaps you know someone who gets a little crazy about their car, couch, or carpet. Possessions aren't necessarily bad, but there's no doubt they can drive a wedge between us and God. If we aren't careful, we won't own our possessions, they will own us. That helps explain why Jesus spoke more about money than just about any other topic. Let's look back at Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and let Christ transform our view of our possessions. Someone please read our first passage, Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21 on the next page.
Don't collect for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But collect for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
All right, look at verse 19. There's a word treasures is defined for us. The Greek word translated here literally means a deposit. In context, it refers to wealth considered so precious we want to store it up and keep it for ourselves. This kind of possession isn't just something we're sharing with other people. The point of this comment is things that we are hoarding for ourselves, kind of like this guy Bill Stanley did with his motorcycle. Okay, but things we want to store up and keep for ourselves. Before we look at our author's commentary on this, let me ask you a question. Are possessions, for example, material possessions, are a real problem? Are those possessions our real problem?
Only if you make it a problem.
You make it a problem. How do we make it a problem?
You're jealous that somebody might get it or whatever.
You're worried
Worried?
constantly. You
might
And we're not supposed to worry.
Not supposed to worry.
Too devoted.
Too devoted to them. What are our attitudes and our thoughts about our possessions? What are they characterized by? How do we form our opinions about our possessions? Where does that come from?
Emotional attachment.
Comes from our emotional attachment. The Jewish people refer to that as our heart, our internal. What's most important to us comes out of what we believe, what our heart tells us, how we're inward, our inward person thinks about things, our emotions, as Max called it. All right, so our attitudes come from that. Look at the point of our lesson again at the top of the page. Possessions don't last, your relationship with God does. Where does our relationship with God come from? Our heart, absolutely, our spirit life, our spirit side. That's where we get this relationship with God. We can't touch Him, we can't see Him, it's not a tangible thing. And so we're not able to actually go and visit God, but instead God's in us, in our hearts. And so your relationship with God does, and that's the connection point between our possessions and our heart. It's how we treat God and how we view God. That should then dictate how we handle our possessions. It's first of all what we think about God and what He's done for us. All right. Our heart has to be right before we can do rightly with our possessions. Turn to page 32 now. Look what our author has told us. We all have things we treasure, possessions we value more highly than others do. My wife often asks how many fishing lures one man could possibly need, and my joking response is always the same: just one more. The problem with our possessions is that they can never satisfy. We know this from experience, and yet we still feel the pressure when the next ad reveals something else we just can't live without. It's not easy to turn away from earthly possessions, especially in today's culture, but it's critical for followers of Christ to do so. The good news from Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21 that we just read is that when we invest in eternal treasures, we send them ahead of us. When we use our resources and possessions to advance God's kingdom, we collect for ourselves, quote, treasures in heaven. One way we can invest in God's kingdom is through giving to our local church. I believe in the tithe, giving 10% of my money and resources to God. Malachi chapter 3, verse 10. Some people say the tithe was a part of the Old Testament law and therefore it doesn't apply to us today. It's true that we now live under grace, but grace always goes beyond the letter of the law. I don't approach tithing as some legalistic practice. Instead, it's my starting point for giving, for acknowledging that everything ultimately belongs to God. Stop there for a minute. What do you think about the tithe, the 10%? What is your thought about that? What does the Bible tell you?
The first tenth. Supposed to be the first tenth.
Does the Bible tell you that about you?
Say that about what?
Does the Bible tell you the first tenth belongs to God? Is that what it tells you?
All of it belongs to God.
All of it belongs to God. It does.
And he's giving it to you.
Well, the Ten Commandments, which one of the Ten Commandments says thou shalt tithe?
None.
None. Except for the first one. The first one says all of it belongs to God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. It's a trick, I know. You got it. But the other laws, there are many, many other laws that God gave the Jewish people for how to live, how to try to live out a legalistic way of trying to please Him, all by demonstrating that they couldn't possibly do that. They needed a Savior instead. That's the whole purpose of the law, we find out in the Gospels, was to prove to the people that you can't measure up. You can't be just and righteous before me because these laws are just too impossible for you to keep. That law of to the tithe, the specific one in Malachi we're talking about, was given to the Jewish people. It was a guideline for them. It wasn't intended to be, you can do this and no more, but you have to do this and no less. It was more of a focus on, I deserve your attention. I deserve your praise. I deserve your recognition that everything is provided by me. It all belongs to me. So God taught His people to try to focus on Him through the tithe. So no, the tithe isn't something that we are obligated to do. But what are we obligated to do still is the same thing that the Jewish people were obligated to do.
Him first.
Pardon?
Put God first.
Put God first. That's a good way to say it. Absolutely. Put God first. If you put God first, are you going to withhold everything for yourself and say, this is all mine? You can't have any of it. No. Like this man says, the tithe is a good starting point. It's still a guideline that makes sense. It's something that you can try to figure out. If you need some guidance to calculate for yourself, what can I do to be responsive to God because of what He's given me, you can certainly use that instruction on the tithe. He gave it to the Jewish people as an instruction. You can use it, but you're not obligated with that. What you're obligated to do instead is, first of all, as she said, recognize God first. But look what happens. Look at the next paragraph. Unfortunately, the church as a whole is doing a poor job of giving our resources back to God. Depending on what research you read, the average Christian gives between 2.5% and 4% of what they earn. 2.5% to 4%. God's not much of a priority in that. I believe many in the church are living in financial scarcity because of their decision to withhold their resources from God. See 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6. And I think that's an important verse. So I wrote down out of my translation, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6 says this. Remember this, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. And that's the principle that this author is reminding us of. It doesn't have to be that way. When we trust God with our finances and put Him first, we'll be transformed in our possessions. The title of today's lesson. All right, someone, if you would, please read our next Bible passage, Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 and 23.
The eye is the lamp. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, and your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness?
Jesus taught in word pictures all the time. He didn't talk literally about things sometimes. Sometimes it was a word picture. Needs another example of a word picture. So look at lamp of the body. A portable lamp that gave enough light to help a person find his or her way in the darkness. Such lamps were common in the ancient world and could be attached to a person's body in a variety of ways. What did they use for lamps in the ancient world? Pardon? Oil? But what was it that made the light? Fire. It was a fire. Whether it was fueled by oil or candle wick or whatever, it was all fire. So can you imagine carrying a lit candle on your forehead? But that's what they did. They would carry around a source of fire in some container or some small device so they could see what they were doing. And they would use that as a portable lamp. We take it for granted these days with all the kinds of different flashlights we have, and now the new LED flashlights that are extremely bright and powerful. It's amazing what they can do. But these people had to use some source of fire, and like I said, for their source of light. Turn to page 34 now. How good is your eyesight? I read that and I thought, what? What are you talking about? According to the Vision Impact Institute, 3 out of 4 Americans need vision correction. And of that group, up to 41% don't wear glasses or contacts on a regular basis, but they should. Let me state the obvious. Life can be skewed, even dangerous, if it's not in focus. So remember that statistic next time you're out driving your car. The people around you, maybe they're one of the ones that need glasses. That's equally true if our spiritual focus is out of whack. Jesus spoke of the eye that is good, borrowing from the Jewish idea that a good eye represented a generous attitude. By contrast, a bad eye was stingy and self-focused.
We all wear glasses in here.
I know, I was looking all around, except for one. Right.
He got it.
He's got it.
He's got him.
Oh,
Yeah, he just doesn't have
I
one.
thought he had the contact.
No wonder he can't see.
Yeah, I know.
There you
I
go,
can
he's in
read.
focus now.
So if our eyes are in need of correction, what kind of correction can we find in God for our spiritual eyes? You ever thought about that? How can we have spiritual eye correction?
I think the Holy Spirit would have a lot
Holy Spirit,
God's word,
God's word.
of those good kids.
the Bible.
There's a woman on the ministry and radio on the mornings I hear every morning at 7:20. Mary Welchel, Christian Working Woman Program. She's now remarried, not remarried, but married for the first time, married a woman. And she has a principle that she teaches us occasionally, and she calls it seeing things through Jesus' eyes. I want to see through Jesus' eyes. And the way she does that is she studies Jesus' words. She encourages people to do that. Read the scripture, see how Jesus approached whatever it was, particularly if it approaches something that's difficult, or approaches a sinner, approach forgiveness, approach whatever. See things through Jesus' eyes. And so she said that it takes a lot of repetition of doing it over and over again, and you still have to keep coming back to it, she said, to learn how to look and see things through Jesus' eyes. So I think she's really got the right point. We don't have that power. Holy Spirit can give it to us. And her words of encouragement are, focus on what Jesus said. Your eyes will be better focused on what Jesus saw in your life as well. In the modern world, a nearsighted attitude only considers how things affect me. It's easy to base decisions on our own comfort or pleasure, even to the point where we lose focus on God's kingdom. We need to remember these words from the Apostle Paul. So we do not focus on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. You'll find that 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. So how do you fix your eyes on something you cannot see? Several actions will help you maintain a clear focus so that, quote, your eye is good, and, quote, your whole body will be full of light, as Matthew chapter 6, verse 22 tells us. First of all, fix your eyes daily on Christ. See Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. Same principle this woman teaches on her radio program. Next, renew your mind daily through the Word. Again, the same principle. You'll find that in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. Confess any selfish pursuits, interests, or goals that cloud your vision. How could those selfish interests or pursuits cloud your vision? What does that mean by clouding your vision in the context we're talking about? How would your vision get cloudy? What would happen?
You can't see past the cataracts.
Okay. If we're trying to see through Jesus' eyes, these other things clouding our vision means we turn away from that priority. We turn away from God as our source and our provision and the most important thing to us, and we make something else more important. As soon as we do that, we get focused on something else as being the most important thing in our life, our vision gets cloudy, our spiritual vision gets cloudy. Because what we're focusing on at that point is something that really involves our human self, our mortal flesh, and not, as Paul said, not on things unseen. We're focusing on what we feel and experience. We take our eyes off of God, even though it's so hard to keep looking at Him and know that He's got it all under control. We tend to focus inward instead, and that clouds our vision. The final one there, invest in others and build up treasures in heaven. Matthew chapter 6, verses 20 through 21 we read. I encourage you to look at all these verses. There's other verses there, we didn't actually read all those, but there's some very good verses there that help us understand that. Your spiritual vision is important. Do whatever it takes each day to keep your focus on Christ. Look at question number 3 there. How do these verses contribute to Jesus' teaching about possessions? Look at those points in these verses we read. How do these contribute to what Jesus taught us? What are the treasures in heaven that Jesus is asking us to build up? What treasures are those?
Service to others.
Service to others. Service to the church. What's the treasure going to look like in heaven? We build up for yourself treasure in heaven. We understand treasure on earth, it's a tangible thing. So what's treasure in heaven?
The old movie Stars in My Crown, remember years ago?
Stars in my crown.
No pain, no.
Yes. We will be free of all these earthly bindings we have, all these earthly problems. But there's also even more than this.
Christ, to be worshiping.
We'll be worshiping Christ forever. But there's this other side of spiritual, eternal life that isn't described in much detail to us. Stars on our crown, one of those. Rewards in heaven. The Father will reward you. We don't know all those details. We don't know exactly what that means. But we know they're going to be valuable things. They're going to be called treasures in heaven. And whatever we receive from God will be perfectly suited for us. Whatever gifts He gives us.
Well, the streets are gold up there.
Streets are gold. Yes, they are. So we will be given, on God's own determination, reward. Stars in our crown, as Bill put it, the old concept.
I think we'll all be happy just to be there.
We will have, that's my desire, just to
We
be
wake
there.
up in heaven,
Absolutely.
There's other people that we bring with us.
Other people we bring with us, and I think that's very likely part of what our rewards are going to look like. Are those people that we influence, that we had a role in helping them, our fruit, if you will, that we helped find the truth of Jesus Christ. Whatever they all are, they're going to be wonderful. They're going to be treasures. Someone please read our last verse, Matthew chapter 6, verse 24.
No one can be a slave to two masters. Either he will hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot be slaves of God and of money.
All right, slavery in this country is no longer legal. It hasn't been for a long time. So how are these verses understood for you? How do you understand what is being written here about Jesus' instruction?
We're slaves to our possessions.
Slaves to our possessions. Yeah. What was the normal experience in those days when slavery was practiced? What was the normal experience in the relationship between the slave and the slave owner? Pardon?
No, I meant to say it was,
own anything.
Slaves own nothing.
Yeah.
And I want people to know that we've sanitized our history, because we had more white slaves than we had black slaves, Irish slaves, and the white slaves were treated worse than the black slaves were. The black slave was valued 7 times more than a white slave. So you could kill a white slave in America, it became against the law. The British passed a law, it was against the law to kill a black slave, but you could kill an Irish slave. They killed more Irish men and women than they killed black men and women under slavery. And they took all the men out of Ireland and sent them to the Caribbean. That's the reason why so many of these black men have Irish names. And the women and children in Ireland starved to death because there was nobody there to feed them and take care of them. So they took the women for sex slaves, the British Army did. So they don't mention that in our American history. They always talk about black slavery. And the blacks need to understand that there was also whites that were slavery, and they were treated more badly than the blacks were. So if you have a black friend that asks you about it, tell them about white slavery too, and then maybe they'll
Where'd they get those
realize
black
that they
slaves?
weren't.
Listen,
that-
what?
yeah.
Where did,
There was a master-slave relationship, and they were
oh,
abused.
okay.
Yeah.
Ireland.
All right, the master
So
slave
you'd be a
relation-
white slave or a black slave, you were abused, and for under certain circumstances. But then others were treated quite good. It depended on what the master, I think, thought
On
of
your
them.
owner.
Yeah. And how about the master valued them too, as to how they treated them.
There's business owners, that some business owners will take care of their people.
Yeah.
And other business owners won't.
Yeah, right.
Same principle.
All right.
We only see movies and things you hear about, they only show you the black men, how bad they were treated, but there were some that were not treated so badly because they were valued,
Let me ask you a
Slavery
question.
started in Africa.
But regardless, when you're a slave, you're not free, so it was not good to be a slave, period,
Slave is not free, that's part of the characteristic of the relationship. What else is true about the relationship between slave and master?
You obey.
You obey,
You obey, you submit
Obey.
yourself.
you're controlled. The master has all authority, absolute authority, actually. And the slave's only option is to obey. We don't see that in our culture because we don't practice that, but we need to realize that's what slave and master really meant. The master had total control. Whatever he said had to be done. And the slave had absolutely no authority and no say-so whatsoever. So they had to obey. The slave was absolutely controlled by the master. Now read that verse again. Who were the slaves in this verse? We are. We're the slaves. We're submitting ourselves as slaves to the control of other things.
Anybody that's not God.
No one can be a slave of two masters. Paul called himself a bondservant of Jesus Christ. What did that mean? Bondservant of Jesus Christ. What did Paul mean by that? Pardon?
Total submission.
Total submission.
But see, that's the difference over here. Anybody that's not God's a slave, but then you talk about the Christian relationship with God. That's different.
How's it different?
Than the non-believer. What's that?
How's that different for a Christian?
How's it different? Because a
Yeah.
Christian should be willing to submit themselves. A non-Christian doesn't know anything about it.
Paul claimed he was a bondservant of Jesus Christ. He meant he was a willing slave, if you will, of Jesus Christ. He didn't mean that Jesus forced him to that. He voluntarily did that. He committed himself. He bound himself to service to Jesus Christ as to be essentially the slave of Jesus Christ in his truth and his ministry. He gave himself to be in that position. And that's what this is all about. We can give ourselves as a slave to be in submission to our wealth and our goals and our ambitions and all of our pride, or we can choose God instead. But what it says here is you can't do both. You can't serve your money, your wealth, and also serve God. You cannot be slaves of God and money. So yes, understand you can be a slave of God. You could do like Paul did. Commit yourself. I want to serve you. There's a goal I have in heaven. I'm trying to pray over every day, actually. What I want the most to hear in heaven is, well done, and I was good and faithful servant. I want to be a commended servant. I want to be a commendable servant in front of God. But we can choose now whether we serve God or we choose to serve money. And money in this category isn't just dollars and cents. It is serving our own self-interest or gathering our treasures that we are defining up at the top there. All those things we're getting together to make ourselves feel better and make ourselves more comfortable and make ourselves feel more important. It's that kind of treasure gathering.
Chuck, a while ago, when you were talking about examples, our neighbor across the street's 89 and 88 on English couple, and they just literally are in their yard every day looking for weed and everything. They call people come over if they see something in the yard like that. Remind me that, I think it's that True Green ad on TV,
That's the
yard
only
with
thing
your yard
that
leaf,
matters.
where your pizza boy can't even step on the yard without taking his shoes off. He's doing the pizza. And some people, these people literally worship their yard. They're out there every day.
Yes.
That's their treasure.
But ours may be worse, so. We're not gonna tell ours.
Okay.
It's not my yard, you can tell the difference in her yard across the street and my yard.
All right, our commentary now is on page 35, if you turn to that page. And I have to confess, I'm not sure what this is all about. As the old song says, you gotta serve somebody. You know what song that is?
No.
It doesn't sound familiar to me.
The old song,
Is that
As the
right?
old song says, you gotta serve somebody.
Is that a Negro spiritual?
I don't know, I
I
don't,
don't remember that old song.
Irish musicians, what song is that?
No idea.
No idea either. I read that till I thought, oh, anyway. But apparently there's a song that says you gotta serve somebody. Ultimately, we serve what we focus on each day. Wow, we serve what we focus on each day. Dear Lord, give me the eyes to see as Jesus saw. Most people live their lives as slaves to their own passions and desires. But both Paul and James identified themselves as slaves of Christ. You'll find that, for example, Romans chapter 1, verse 1, and James chapter 1, verse 1, where both of them called themselves a bondservant of Jesus Christ. That may sound ironic, since no one is more free than a follower of Christ. Yet that's the paradox of the gospel. A life lived for self leads to slavery, while a life lived in service and surrender to Christ leads to freedom. The thing about being a slave, and again, everyone serves someone or something, is that you can only have one master. Jesus was clear. If you are serving money, which means chasing after it and filling your life with all that it can give you, you're not serving God. Jesus was calling for single-minded devotion and commitment, a tough call in our culture, which is short on commitment. This is important. The largest cult in our country is the cult of cultural Christianity. Cultural Christianity says Jesus came to be a part of your life. That's false. Jesus never came to be a part of our lives. Either he is our entire life, as you'll see in Colossians chapter 3, verse 4, or he has no part of our lives. We have to make a choice between those two, and that choice will be reflected in our relationship with money. What do you think about that? Did Jesus come to be a part of your life?
Should be our life. Wells us.
Pardon?
He is pretty much in your life.
What do we call that when he did that? What do we call the fact that when we were saved? How do we refer to that experience of being saved?
Dying to self.
Dying to self and being born again. So actually what we're trying to say is that Jesus wants us to be brand new creatures. He wants us to be new people. People no longer having to only give in to sin and only live by sin's impulses and sin's temptations, but instead he wants us to be free of all of that and to live for Jesus Christ himself. So really and truly what the author is pointing out is we sometimes want to make Jesus such a small part. Maybe we see him on Sundays, or thinking about him on Sundays, or thinking about him when we hear something that sounds good, or we see some good act on TV or something that somebody did well, we think about Jesus, but that's not what he wants all of us. And that's hard to do. That yielding to Jesus all the time is something that we'll never make happen consistently, but it's still our goal. It's still what he wants from us, is to be his all the time, be able to see things through his eyes and do things according to his will in our life, because that's why the Spirit's with us in the first place. The Holy Spirit came into our lives and lives within us to equip us to do just exactly that. And we don't do it well, we fail. He understands that, but we're supposed to continue that priority. Money is an area where many of us have compromised instead of being fully committed to Christ. Why should this be so? The answer is fear. We are afraid God won't provide. Fully committing our finances to God is perhaps the toughest test of our faith that many of us will face. One passage God has used time and time again to grow my faith and help me to trust God with my finances is Psalm chapter 37, verse 25, which says, I have been young and now I am old, yet I have not seen the righteous abandoned or his children begging for bread. Money and possessions are temporary. God is faithful, and he has promised to never abandon us. Let's serve the one who has never let us down and never will. Let's turn the page now for our closing.
By the way, it's a long song, You Gotta Serve Somebody, a Bob Dylan song. It says old, I don't know who wrote this thing old, but it says, the way back when he wrote it, you may be ambassador to England or France, you may like to gamble, you might like to dance, you may be the heavyweight champion of the world, you may be a socialite with a long string of pearls, and it goes on. So you gotta serve somebody, it's a, you gotta serve somebody's name of the song, but I never heard of it either. You know, Bob Dylan fan, you may have heard of it.
Well done,
Yes,
Nice, probably.
I never heard it, you gotta serve somebody, was the name of it, says here. I missed out on that one, I guess.
Vietnam era, so probably busy.
By the way, while you're closing, I just got a text from Carl that Joe Ricardo is home. All right, she only had some facial bruising and
good.
so on, and the car's home as well, so he was gonna check on her, but.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. Page 36. What will you do this week to make your relationship with God a priority over your possessions? Consider these options. First of all, memorize. Commit Psalm chapter 37, verse 25 to memory. Let this verse strengthen your faith and drive out your fear, especially as it relates to your finances. Secondly, review. Take a look at your bank statement or purchase history for the past month. Use this information to make a list of your priorities and major concerns. Finally, invest. One way to invest in God's kingdom is through giving to your church. If you haven't been giving, start this week. If you are giving, take the next step and begin giving 1% more of your income to God's kingdom. You can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead by investing your earthly resources in heavenly treasures. Remember that truth, because your possessions will last for the blink of an eye. Your investment in God's kingdom will last for eternity.
By the way, Psalm 37:25 says, I have been young and now I'm old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread.
God always does provide. He always is there. Sometimes not on our timetable, sometimes not in the way that we might expect, but he doesn't ever forsake us. And never will. Anybody else have a comment? Anything else about this lesson we need to talk about or think about?
Many of you said a little bit missing your daddy today. Remember, we're here to worship our Heavenly Father.
Yes, ma'am.
He'll always be with us.
Very good.
We talk about the giving, and it's more important that people try to, like you say, they estimate about 1 in 5 in our church probably here tithe, but because of the lack of giving, the percentage, like we said, for the International Mission Board, the old Foreign Mission Board's gone down. We had to have those 1,000 missionaries volunteer retiring. When you read statistically, you see Southern Baptists are shrinking every year a little bit, a couple of percent, and they think a lot of young people are going over to independent churches like Calvary. They're not associating with traditional denominational churches like Methodist Baptists. Are going to these independent interdenominational churches. So it doesn't necessarily mean we're shrinking a lot as Christians go. I think that's probably happening too, but we are shrinking by certain denominations, and they're going to independent, denominational churches and all. And most churches are growing, and we're kind of regressing a little bit. I guess it's more important if we're to keep the Baptist church going, that we become a little more generous givers.
Anything else?
Some of those big churches like Calvary Chapel, they don't have the accountability factor. They just toss their money in. That's what I've been told by people that go there. They don't have to fill out anything. They just put their money in.
No membership.
Right.
No membership.
No.
So,
Yeah, and I don't know what they do in the way of missions either, as far as
They do a lot for missions, but if, I've heard that if you go there for help, they'll say go to All Galley, or go to.
They don't do much
the ones
local.
that, yeah, they tell you to go to another
go
church.
First
for
Baptist or
help.
go to somewhere else.
Yes, we think.
I love the subject, thanks to the class, we dropped me $203 for the speakers.
Oh, thank you very much.
Praise God.
Thank you. For those of you who weren't here last time, we decided, we were small in number last time, that we decided to postpone till today, so thank you, appreciate that. Yes,
Somebody explained to me this week that you